The Galactic Council had ruled the known universe for 12,000 years, and they believed they had seen everything. When the first radio signals from a small blue planet reached their sensors, most council members barely noticed. Another primitive species sending noise into the void. Nothing special. Nothing worth their attention. They had watched countless civilizations rise and fall, and most never made it past their own solar system. But humanity was different. Though the council did not know this yet, Captain Daniel Hayes stood on the bridge of the Liberty, humanity's first vessel capable of traveling faster than light. His crew had just returned from their successful maiden voyage to Proxima Centauri when the message arrived. It was not a friendly greeting or a welcome to the galactic community. It was a command delivered in cold, emotionless words that left no room for discussion or debate. The transmission filled the main screen with alien text that their computers quickly translated. Species designation human. You are summoned to appear before the Galactic Council within 30 standard rotations. Failure to comply will result in quarantine protocols being enforced against your entire civilization. Lieutenant Emma Brooks looked up from her communication station with worry clearly visible in her expression. Captain, they are treating us like children being called to see the school principal. There is no respect in their tone at all, Hayes allowed himself. A small smile despite the tension he felt building in his chest. Maybe that is exactly what we are to them, Emma. They said their civilization has existed for 12,000 years. We have been in space for barely 200 years. Let us not get offended just yet. He turned to his tactical officer. Commander Jake Sullivan. Set a course for the coordinates they provided in their message. The journey to the council station took 3 weeks of constant travel through hyperspace. When the Liberty finally emerged near their destination, every crew member on the bridge fell completely silent. The structure before them was beyond anything they had imagined possible. It was a massive rotating sphere the size of Earth's moon, covered with thousands of docking ports. Ships of every imaginable design moved around it in perfectly organized patterns. Like a carefully choreographed dance, we are being hailed again, Brooks announced quietly. Put it through, Hayes ordered. A face appeared on their view screen that was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered in their short time among the stars. The being was tall with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer slightly under the lighting. Its eyes were too large for what humans would consider normal, and its skull was elongated in a way that suggested either evolution or genetic modification. It wore robes that seemed to have technology woven directly into the fabric itself. I am Counselor Vex of the Archon Dominion. You will dock at port 773 and proceed immediately to Chamber 42. Your vessel will be scanned upon arrival. Any weapons must be declared before docking begins. Hayes stood and straightened his uniform carefully before responding. This is Captain Daniel Hayes, representing Earth and humanity. We carry standard defensive armaments appropriate for an exploration vessel of our class. We are happy to declare them fully and honestly. Vex's expression did not change at all, making it impossible to read his reaction. Defensive armaments? How quaint and primitive. Dock immediately and do not deviate from your assigned approach vector. The screen went dark before Hayes could respond further. Sullivan muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Hayes to hear. Well, they certainly are a friendly, welcoming bunch of folks, as the Liberty slowly maneuvered into the assigned docking port. The crew could not help but notice the attention they were receiving from other species. Beings of all shapes and sizes stopped what they were doing to stare at the human ship. Some seemed genuinely curious about the newcomers. Others looked dismissive as if humanity was beneath their notice. A few appeared almost sorry for them, as if the humans were walking into something terrible. Hayes selected a small team to accompany him into the station itself. Sullivan Brooks and Dr. Lisa Martin, who served as the ship's chief scientist and medical officer. They were met at the airlock by a group of beings that could only be described as guards. Though they carried no visible weapons that human eyes could detect, the walk to Chamber 42 took nearly an hour through corridors, designed to impress and intimidate anyone who walked through them. The architecture was ancient and grand, with every surface covered in inscriptions, written in languages that humanity had never seen before. Finally, After what felt like an eternity of walking, they were led into a vast amphitheater that could hold thousands of beings. The council sat in a semicircle, high above the floor where Hayes and his team stood. 12 beings each, representing a different species, and each radiating an aura of absolute unquestionable authority. At the center of the semicircle sat an enormous creature that resembled a praying mantis, its body covered in gleaming chitinous plates that reflected the chamber's lights. Humans. It spoke in a voice that was amplified throughout the massive chamber. I am High Counselor Zax. You have been summoned here today because your species has achieved faster than light travel without any council oversight or approval. This is unprecedented in recent galactic history, and it concerns us greatly. Hayes stepped forward carefully, very aware that he was representing all of humanity in this moment. With respect, Counselor Zax, we were not aware that we needed anyone's permission to explore our own galaxy. We meant no offense to your laws or customs, eh? A ripple of sound that might have been laughter, or might have been something else entirely echoed from the galleries high above where hundreds of other species watched the proceedings with great interest. Vex leaned forward from his position on the council. The galaxy is not yours to explore freely as you please. There are rules that must be followed, protocols that must be observed. There are zones that are restricted for very good reasons. There are wars that have been frozen in place by council decree. You cannot simply wander blindly into situations that you do not understand, and that could endanger countless lives. Dr. Martin spoke up in her most diplomatic tone. Then perhaps you could take the time to educate us properly, Counselor. We are eager to learn and to follow appropriate guidelines. Zax's massive eyes fixed on the humans with an intensity that made them feel like insects under a microscope. The galaxy is divided into 3 distinct zones. Green zones are designated for peaceful exploration and trade between species. Yellow zones are contested territories where active conflicts are ongoing between various factions. Red zones are quarantined for numerous reasons, including deadly diseases, ancient weapon systems, and unstable spatial anomalies. Your species is hereby restricted to green zones only until such time as you prove yourselves worthy of greater freedom and responsibility. Sullivan's voice carried a sharp edge that he did not bother to hide. Worthy? How exactly do we prove ourselves worthy to you? Another counselor spoke up, this one appearing to be made entirely of living crystal that pulsed with internal light. Through trials, of course, through service to the council and the greater galactic community, through demonstrating that you can follow our laws and contribute meaningfully to galactic stability and peace. Many species never advance beyond green zone restrictions. They simply lack the proper temperament or the necessary courage to face what lies beyond. Hayes felt his team tense beside him at those words. The courage, Counselor? Are you suggesting that humanity lacks courage? Zax made a clicking sound with his mandibles that might have been amusement or condescension. Yes, Captain Hayes. You see, we have thoroughly studied your broadcasts and transmissions. We have analyzed your history and examined your culture in great detail. You are clearly a violent species given your planet's nearly continuous state of warfare throughout its entire recorded history. However, we believe that despite all your aggressive posturing and military displays, you actually fear real battle when it truly matters. That is precisely why we doubt you will ever advance beyond your current restrictions. The trials we require involve situations where true courage, not mere violence, is absolutely paramount to success. The chamber fell into complete silence. Hayes felt his jaw tighten, and he carefully controlled his breathing before responding. With all due respect, Counselor, I believe you may have fundamentally misunderstood what you observed in our history. Humanity does not fear battle or conflict. We have simply learned through hard experience what the true cost of war really is. There is a profound difference between fear and wisdom. Zax made that clicking sound again. We shall see, Captain Hayes. We shall certainly see. You now have 60 standard rotations to review all regulations and restrictions that apply to your species. After that period, if you wish to attempt the first trial, you may formally petition this council for permission. You are dismissed. As the human delegation was escorted back toward their ship, Brooks leaned close to Hayes and whispered, "Sir, they think we are cowards." "They actually believe humanity is afraid of fighting," Hayes replied quietly, so only his team could hear. "Let them think whatever they want, Emma. For right now, it does not matter what they believe." But as they walked back through those ancient corridors, passing groups of aliens who whispered and pointed at the humans, Daniel Hayes began forming a plan in his mind. If the Galactic Council wanted to test humanity's courage, then he would give them a demonstration they would never forget for the rest of their incredibly long lives. He just needed time to understand what they were really afraid of deep down. And more importantly, he needed to figure out what humanity could accomplish that 12,000 years of galactic civilization had never even imagined was possible. The Liberty remained docked at the Council Station for the next 40 days, while Captain Hayes and his crew worked tirelessly to understand everything they could about the trials. During this time, they discovered things about galactic politics and history that both fascinated and deeply troubled them. Dr. Lisa Ye Martin spent nearly 16 hours every single day in the station's public archives, which was a vast digital library accessible to all member species of the Council. She compiled her findings carefully and presented them in daily briefings to the senior staff in the ship's conference room. The trials are very real, and they have been used for thousands of years, she explained while pulling up holographic displays that floated in the air above the conference table. But they are not what we initially thought they would be. They're not tests of military strength or technological advancement. They're deeply psychological in nature. Commander Jake Sullivan leaned forward with interest. "What exactly do you mean by psychological, Lisa?" Martin continued with a serious expression on her face. "The first trial is always exactly the same for every species that attempts it. Species must retrieve a data core from a derelict ship floating in a yellow zone, specifically in an area called the Shattered Belt. It sounds simple and straightforward on the surface, but there is a significant catch that makes it extremely difficult. The belt is home to creatures called the Void Wraiths." Lieutenant Emma Brooks pulled up the relevant files on her tablet and began reading aloud. Void Wraiths are predatory entities that exist partially in subspace, which means they phase in and out of normal reality. They cannot be killed or even harmed by any conventional weapons that we know of, and they feed exclusively on the fear of their victims. According to these historical records, they do not actually cause any physical harm to anyone. They just terrify their victims so completely and thoroughly that the victims flee in absolute panic. Hayes asked the question that was on everyone's mind. How many species have actually attempted this first trial over the years? Martin's expression grew even more grim than before. In the last 1,000 years alone, 47 different species have attempted it. Only 12 of those species actually succeeded in completing the trial. The others either turned back before reaching the objective, completely abandoned the mission halfway through, or suffered total psychological breakdowns that required extensive medical treatment. 3 entire species never recovered from their attempts. They are still restricted to their home systems to this very day, permanently traumatized by what they experienced. Sullivan leaned back heavily in his chair. "So the Council genuinely thinks we are going to run away scared when we encounter these Void Wraith creatures?" Brooks spoke up thoughtfully. "Or can you really blame them for thinking that way? Look at what they have seen of our history. Our entertainment media is absolutely filled with horror movies and scary stories. Our military history is full of retreats and surrenders when we faced overwhelming odds against us. They only see the times when we ran away. They do not see the context or understand the times when we stood firm and fought." Hayes drummed his fingers slowly on the table while thinking deeply. "But they are missing the most important context of all. We run away when it is smart and tactical to run. Stand and fight when standing actually matters for something important. The real question is, how do we prove that distinction to them in a way they will understand and respect?" Brooks made a suggestion. "Maybe we do not try to prove anything to them with words. Maybe we just go out there and do it through our actions. Over the next 20 days, Hayes and his team planned every single detail with meticulous care and precision. They studied every available account of encounters with the Void Wraiths. They analyzed every sensor reading that had ever been recorded. They read every psychological report from species who who had faced these creatures and survived. They trained their minds and bodies. They meditated daily. They prepared themselves mentally for exactly what they would face in that derelict ship. On the 60th rotation since their arrival, Hayes formally requested an audience with the full council. The chamber was absolutely packed this time with observers from across the galaxy. Word had spread quickly that the humans were actually going to attempt the trial, and species from hundreds of worlds had come specifically to watch. Most of them openly expected to be entertained by humanity's failure. Captain Hayes, High Counselor Zax, intoned from his elevated position, "You wish to formally attempt the first trial?" "We do," Counselor Hayes replied with calm confidence. A murmur of surprised voices ran through the assembled crowd like a wave. Counselor Vex spoke up with clear skepticism written across his blue features. "You understand fully what you will face out there. Void wraiths of broken species far older and far more experienced than yours. Some of those species had centuries of space travel before they attempted this trial." Hayes met his gaze steadily. "We understand the risks involved, Counselor. We are prepared to face them." Vex studied the humans for a long moment before responding. "Very well then. Exact coordinates will be transmitted directly to your vessel within the hour. You have 10 standard days to retrieve the data core and return here. Any longer than that, and you will be officially declared lost. The trial begins whenever you decide you are ready." As the humans left the council chamber, they walked past large groups of aliens who were actively placing wagers on the outcome. The odds were heavily in favor of complete human failure. The journey to the Shattered Belt took 2 full days of travel through hyperspace. The region was named very appropriately because thousands of destroyed vessels from ancient forgotten wars drifted endlessly through space like a massive graveyard. Some of the wreckage was millions of years old, and their origins had been completely lost to time and history. "Sensors are picking up the derelict ship now," Brooks reported from her station. "It is an old Council science vessel that was abandoned approximately 200 years ago. The data core should be located in the central archive room, according to the ship's original design specifications." Sullivan asked the question everyone was thinking. "And what about the wraiths? Are they showing up on sensors?" Brooke shook her head slowly. "No direct readings of them specifically, but there are very unusual subspace fluctuations scattered throughout the entire belt. They are definitely here somewhere watching and waiting." Hayes took a long, deep breath before giving his orders. "All right then. Sullivan, Martin, and I will take the shuttle across to the derelict. Brooks, you have command of the Liberty while we are gone. If we do not return within 6 hours, I want you to leave the belt immediately and report everything to the Council." Brooks protested immediately. "Sir, we are not just going to leave you there." Hayes's voice became firm. "That is a direct order, Lieutenant. Someone needs to get back to Earth and tell them what happened here if this goes wrong." The shuttle ride across the empty space to the derelict vessel was tense, but proceeded without incident. The ship loomed before them, growing larger with each passing moment, a massive vessel that had once been state-of-the-art technology.
Ow.
It was nothing more than a dark floating tomb with its hull breached in several places, an emergency.
Ow.
Lights flickering weakly inside. They docked carefully and entered through the main airlock. The very moment they crossed the threshold into the ship, the temperature seemed to drop dramatically, though their environmental suit sensors showed absolutely no actual change in temperature at all. Psychological effect already starting, Martin noted in a voice that wavered slightly despite her. Scientific training, they made their way carefully through corridors that were filled with floating debris and the disturbing remnants of the crew's final desperate moments. Whatever had happened on this ship, it had been chaotic and terrifying. Then they felt it arrive. It started as just a presence, like a heavy weight pressing down directly on their minds. The shadows in the corridors seemed to move independently of their helmet lights. Whispers echoed all around them in languages they could not understand, but somehow felt deep in their bones. Sullivan stopped walking abruptly with his hand instinctively moving to his sidearm. "They are here now. The wraiths are here." The first wraith materialized in the corridor directly ahead of them. It was completely impossible to describe in any adequate way. It was a shape that actually hurt to look at directly. It was a darkness that seemed to actively consume light itself. It was a presence that radiated pure, undiluted terror. toward them in a way that defied all known physics, flickering in and out of reality itself. Hayes felt fear slam into him like a physical blow to his chest. Every single instinct in his body screamed at him to run, to get back to the shuttle immediately, to flee this cursed place as fast as possible. Beside him, he could hear Martin's breathing accelerate rapidly, and Sullivan's hand was shaken visibly. But none of them ran away. "Remember the training we did?" Hayes said through gritted teeth while forcing himself to stay calm. "It is not physically real. The fear we feel is real, but the actual threat to our bodies is not. It cannot actually hurt us physically," Sullivan gasped, while trying to control his panic. "Telling myself that does not make it feel any less terrifying, Captain." More wraiths began appearing all around them, materializing from nowhere and surrounding them completely. The corridor filled with writhing shadows and whispered threats in a dozen alien languages. Horrifying images flashed directly through their minds, showing them their worst fears made completely manifest. Hayes saw Earth burning in nuclear fire. Sullivan saw his family dying slowly and painfully. Martin saw herself lost alone in deep space forever. "Keep moving forward," Hayes ordered, while forcing his legs to work despite every instinct telling him to run. "Acknowledge the fear you feel, but do not let it control your actions." Step by agonizing step. They advanced slowly through the ship while the wraiths pressed closer with overwhelming presence. Twice, Martin fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Once, Sullivan actually screamed in pure terror. Hayes himself nearly broke completely when a wraith showed him a vivid image of the Liberty being destroyed with his entire crew, dead because of his arrogance and pride. But each time someone faltered, they recovered. They helped each other stand back up. They reminded each other constantly of the mission and why it mattered. "We are human," Hayes said as much to himself as to his struggling team. "We have faced terrible fears before in our history. Every soldier who climbed out of a trench and charged into machine gun fire, every firefighter who ran into a burning building to save strangers, every person who did something absolutely terrifying because it needed to be done. This is just another fear to face and overcome." They finally reached the archive room. 3 hours after entering the derelict ship, the data core was exactly where it was supposed to be, sitting intact and pulsing with a soft blue light. The moment Hayes reached out and touched it with his gloved hand, the wraith screamed. It was a sound that existed only inside their minds, a screech of pure fury and frustration and confusion. The shadows writhed even more violently than before. Pressing in from all sides with renewed intensity, Martin observed with a shaky laugh. "They are angry that we are not running away like everyone else does," Sullivan replied, while clutching the data core tightly. "Good. Let them be angry. We have a job to finish." The return journey back to the shuttle was significantly worse than the trip in. The wraiths threw absolutely everything they had at the humans. Every fear, every doubt, every trauma from their past. Hayes relived watching his father die slowly from cancer. Sullivan faced overwhelming guilt over past mistakes he had made. Martin confronted her deepest insecurities about her own worth and abilities, but they walked through it all, supporting each other constantly and refusing to surrender to the overwhelming terror. When they finally stumbled back into the shuttle, gasping and shaking violently, the wraiths did not follow them inside. Instead, they gathered at the threshold of the airlock, simply watching silently as the humans departed. Brooks nearly cried with relief when the shuttle docked safely. "You actually made it back. My God, you really made it." Hayes handed her the data core with hands that were still trembling. "Set course for the council station immediately. Let us go show them exactly what humanity is made of." As the Liberty jumped away from the shattered belt, none of them noticed the unusual readings their sensors briefly picked up. The void wraiths were behaving differently than ever before, gathering in complex formations they had never shown in recorded history, as if they were discussing and analyzing what they had just witnessed. For the first time in thousands of years, the void wraiths were genuinely confused by their prey. The Liberty's return to the council station was completely different from their departure just days earlier. This time, dozens of ships moved aside immediately to give them priority docking access. As Captain Hayes and his team disembarked from their vessel, They found an unexpected delegation waiting for them at the airlock, including several counselors who had reportedly not left their chambers in years. High Counselor Zax himself stood at the very front of the welcoming group, his massive insectoid form somehow managing to convey genuine surprise despite his utterly alien physiology. "Captain Hayes," he said in a voice that lacked all of its previous condescension and superiority, "you have successfully retrieved the data core." Hayes held up the small device that had cost them so much fear and effort. "Intact and completely undamaged, exactly as you requested. Councillor. Councillor? Vex stepped forward, and his pale blue skin seemed even lighter than usual. "This is truly remarkable, Captain. Most species require 2 or 3 separate attempts before they succeed at this trial, if they ever manage to succeed at all. You completed it on your very first attempt, and more impressively, you brought your entire team back psychologically sound and functional. We trained extensively for it," Hayes replied with simple honesty. Zax repeated the word as if he was tasting something completely foreign. "Training. You trained specifically to face psychological horror. How does one even train for something like that?" Dr. Martin spoke up respectfully. "With all due respect, Counselor, humans have been facing psychological warfare, fear tactics, and terror for our entire recorded history. We have learned through hard experience that fear is just another challenge to understand and overcome. We acknowledge it fully. We understand where it comes from. But we refuse to let it control our decisions and actions." The crystalline counselor, who had spoken during their first meeting, chimed in with her voice resonating musically through the docking area. "I am Counselor Lyra. I must confess openly that we fully expected you to fail, possibly even catastrophically. Your psychological profiles and historical records suggested a species that was prone to fear-based reactions and panic under pressure." "Commander." Sullivan could not help but laugh at the absurdity. "You thought we were cowards simply because we make horror movies for entertainment and have a military history that includes tactical retreats when necessary?" Vex chose his words carefully. "We thought you understood your own limitations quite well, actually." Hayes nodded slowly. "We do understand our limitations, Counselor. That is exactly why we succeeded where others failed. We knew we would be absolutely terrified during this trial. We prepared for that inevitability. We did not expect to be brave or fearless. We expected to be scared out of our minds and do the job anyway despite that fear. That is what real courage actually is." A long, heavy silence followed his words. Zax's mandibles clicked together thoughtfully several times before he spoke again. "You have passed the first trial in record time. Normally, there would be an extended period of evaluation and assessment before the second trial is even offered to a species. However, given your truly exceptional performance, the Council is prepared to offer you the second trial immediately if you wish to attempt it." Hayes exchanged quick glances with his team members. They were all physically and mentally exhausted from their recent ordeal, but he could clearly see the determination burning in their eyes. Despite their fatigue, what exactly is the second trial, Counselor? Lyra stepped forward to explain. "A rescue mission. 3 weeks ago, a large colony ship carrying 5,000 Valorian refugees was viciously attacked by raiders near the Crimson Nebula. The ship managed to escape the initial attack, but sustained heavy damage and is now drifting helplessly in space. The nebula itself interferes severely with all sensors and communication systems. The raiders are still actively patrolling the area, waiting patiently for any rescue attempt so they can finish what they started. They have superior numbers and overwhelming firepower. Hayes understood immediately. And you want us to rescue those 5,000 people." Zax corrected him carefully. "We want you to attempt the rescue, Captain. 3 Council security vessels have already tried to complete this mission. All 3 were forced to withdraw when they encountered the full Raider fleet. The Raiders currently have 15 heavily armed warships. Your Liberty is merely an exploration vessel with minimal defensive weaponry. The logical and sensible action would be to wait for a proper military response, but that will take several weeks to organize. The refugees have only days of life support remaining at most." Sullivan said flatly what everyone was thinking. So this trial is really to see if we will attempt what amounts to a suicide mission. Vex spoke carefully while watching their reactions. The trial is to see if you truly understand the critical difference between courage and foolishness, to see if you can properly assess risk and make appropriate decisions. Many species throughout history have thrown away countless lives attempting to be heroes without thinking. We value wisdom and sound judgment alongside bravery. Hayes turned to face his crew directly. I need to confer privately with my team before making any decision. Is there somewhere we can talk? They were shown to a private conference room that overlooked the station's massive main concourse. Through the transparent walls, they could see hundreds of aliens from dozens of species watching them intently and waiting for humanity's decision. Sullivan spoke first once they were alone. This feels like a trap, Captain. They are testing to see if we are reckless and stupid. Brooks countered his pessimism. Or maybe they are testing to see if we are clever enough to find another way. Maybe the entire point is not to fight the Raiders head-on in direct combat. Martin pulled up all available data on the Crimson Nebula and studied it carefully. This is very interesting. The nebula does not just interfere with sensors randomly. It creates very specific localized spatial distortions in predictable patterns. Ships have to navigate extremely carefully through it, or risk being torn. Completely apart by gravitational shear, Sullivan noted the tactical implications, which is exactly why the Raiders are waiting outside the nebula instead of going in after the refugees themselves. They know that any rescue ship will eventually have to come back out through one of the stable exit points. Hayes stared at the data. Oela's mind worked through the problem methodically. What if we do not come back out the same way we went in? What if we go into the nebula, retrieve the refugees, and then leave through a completely different exit point on the opposite side? Brooks objected immediately. Captain, the nebula is absolutely huge. We would have to navigate blind for days through incredibly dangerous spatial distortions. Martin corrected her with growing excitement in her voice. Not completely blind, actually. Look carefully at these sensor readings. The spatial distortions follow very specific patterns based on the nebula's magnetic field structure. If we map that field carefully and completely, we could calculate and predict safe routes through areas the Raiders would never expect us to use. Sullivan pointed out the obvious problem. That kind of detailed mapping and calculation would take many hours of intensive work. Hayes made his decision. Then we better get started immediately. He activated the communication link to the council chambers. Counselors, we formally accept the second trial. However, we will need 12 hours to prepare properly before departure. Zax appeared on the screen looking concerned. 12 hours, Captain? The refugees have perhaps 72 hours of life support remaining at most. Every single moment counts toward their survival. Hayes remained firm, and if we rush in completely unprepared, we will just add ourselves to the casualty list without saving any one counselor. 12 hours. We will launch at exactly 0800 station time. The Liberty's crew worked tirelessly through the entire night without rest. Dr. Martin and her entire science team mapped the nebula's complex magnetic field using every available sensor reading they could access from Council archives. Brooks coordinated directly with Earth Command, explaining the dangerous situation and formally requesting approval for the high-risk mission. Sullivan and the tactical team studied everything known about the Raiders, tactics and capabilities. 8 hours into their intense preparation, they received a completely unexpected visitor. Councilor. Lyra materialized directly in their conference room, her crystalline form shimmering beautifully under the lights. Captain Hayes, may I speak with you privately for a moment? Hayes looked up from his complex calculations, genuinely surprised. Of course, Counselor. Please sit if your physiology allows it. Lyra remained standing but moved closer. I wanted to explain something important that you should understand. The Council's trials are not designed to be cruel or impossible. We genuinely want species to succeed and advance. But we have learned over many millennia that good intentions and raw bravery alone are never enough. The galaxy is incredibly vast and unbelievably dangerous. species that rush into difficult situations. Without proper preparation, very often do not survive their mistakes. Hayes studied her carefully. Is this a warning, counselor? Lyra's voice became softer. It is context, Captain. The 3 ships that attempted this rescue mission before you, they were all crewed by the Korathi, a renowned warrior species known throughout the galaxy for their legendary courage and fighting spirit. They went in with vastly superior firepower and absolute confidence in their abilities, and they retreated because they quickly realized they were about to be completely slaughtered, and their deaths would not have saved a single refugee life. Hayes absorbed this information. But you are still asking us to try anyway, because sometimes, Captain, the answer is not more firepower or more raw courage. Sometimes it is simply a different perspective, a completely new approach to an old problem. Humanity is young and relatively untested, but you think very differently than species who have followed council protocols for thousands of years. She moved toward the door, then paused. The galaxy desperately needs species who can see creative solutions where we see only impossible problems. But it also needs species wise enough to know when to withdraw and preserve lives. We sincerely hope you are both. After she left, Sullivan whistled low. That was either encouragement or a very polite warning to back out. While we still can, Hayes considered both possibilities. Maybe it was both things at once, which is exactly why we are going to succeed where the mighty Korathi warriors failed. We are not going to fight the raiders at all. We are going to make them completely irrelevant to the outcome. At exactly 0800 station time, the Liberty departed, while half the station's massive population watched from observation. Decks, or via transmitted video feeds. In the council chambers, all 12 counselors monitored the mission personally. The journey to the Crimson Nebula took 18 hours of constant travel. As they approached, their sensors clearly confirmed the Raider fleet's position with 15 warships, arranged in a loose but effective perimeter around the nebula's most accessible exit point. They are hailing us now, Brooks reported. Ignore it completely, Hayes ordered firmly. Take us into the nebula, Vector 73 Mark II. The Liberty plunged directly into the swirling red clouds. Immediately, all their sensors went completely chaotic. The ship shook violently as spatial distortions pulled at the hull. Navigating by magnetic field mapping, Brooks announced, with tension clear in her voice. Following the calculated safe route exactly, for 6 grueling hours they carefully threaded their way through the nebula. Twice they had to stop completely and recalculate when distortions proved stronger than predicted. Once they nearly collided with a drifting fragment of a destroyed ship from some long-forgotten battle. Then finally, their sensors picked up the refugee ship. It was massive and designed to carry thousands, but it was clearly dying. Multiple hull breaches leaked precious atmosphere. Power fluctuated wildly, and it was completely helpless, drifting in one of the few stable pockets within the deadly nebula. Hailing them now, Brooks said. A Valorian appeared on screen, thin and insectoid, with multiple compound eyes, showing clear fear and exhaustion. Please, whoever you are, we desperately need help. Our drives are completely dead. Life support is failing rapidly. There are children here, Hayes spoke calmly. This is Captain Daniel Hayes of the Earth vessel Liberty. We are here to rescue every single one of you. How many can your escape pods hold? Perhaps half our population, but we have nowhere safe to send them. The raiders are waiting outside. Hayes smiled confidently. The raiders will not be a problem at all. Here is exactly what we are going to do. The plan was risky, but brilliantly simple in its execution. The Liberty would dock directly with the massive refugee ship and transfer as many Valorians as physically possible, prioritizing the youngest and most seriously injured first. The remaining refugees would evacuate into their escape pods. Then, instead of heading back through the nebula, toward the blockaded exit where the raiders waited, they would navigate much deeper into the Crimson Nebula to reach an exit point on the complete opposite side where no raiders were stationed. The Valorian captain protested immediately with clear concern in his multiple eyes. It will take at least 3 full days to navigate safely to that distant exit point. Our escape pods do not have nearly enough life support for that long a journey, Hayes replied with calm confidence. Then we will tow them behind us all the way. It was incredibly delicate, an exhausting work that pushed everyone to their absolute limits. The Liberty was never designed to carry thousands of passengers, but the crew made space wherever they possibly could. Refugees filled every single corridor, every storage bay, every available corner of space on the ship. Sullivan personally coordinated the escape pod deployment, carefully linking them together in a long chain that the Liberty could safely tow behind it. 20 hours after first finding the desperate refugees, they began the long, dangerous journey to the far exit on the opposite side of the massive nebula. Meanwhile, at the blockaded exit point, the Raider fleet grew increasingly impatient and aggressive. They sent multiple probes deep into the nebula, trying desperately to locate their prey and the rescue ship. They moved their warships even closer to the exit, preparing for the rescue vessel's inevitable emergence that they were certain would come. They never once realized their targets were moving in the completely opposite direction. 3.5 long days after first entering the Crimson Nebula, the Liberty finally emerged on the far side, successfully towing a long string of escape pods and carrying 5,000 grateful Valorians safely inside. They were immediately met by Council security vessels, who could only stare in complete amazement at the successful rescue mission. When they finally returned to the Council station, they found the entire main concourse packed solid with beings from hundreds of different species, all of them cheering wildly. Counselors Zax, Vex, and Lyra waited personally at the dock. Along with the entire Valorian government in exile, would feared they would never see their people alive again. The Valorian captain embraced Hayes tightly with all 6 of his thin arms. You saved us all. When the Council ships were forced to turn back, we truly thought we were dead and forgotten. We had given up all hope. Hayes spoke diplomatically and respectfully. The Council ships were absolutely right to retreat when they did. They would have been destroyed in direct combat. We simply found a different path that avoided the fight entirely. High Counselor Zax approached slowly, and for the very first time, Hayes saw something that looked remarkably like genuine respect in the massive alien's ancient eyes. Captain Hayes, in 12,000 years of Council history, no species has ever completed 2 major trials so quickly or so decisively. More importantly, you demonstrated not just raw courage, but also wisdom and innovation. You did not fight when fighting would have been foolish and suicidal. You found a creative solution where we could see only an impossible problem, Hayes replied humbly. With respect, Counselor, the problem was only impossible if you assumed you absolutely had to go through the Raiders. We just looked at the map differently than others did. Vex stepped forward, and his blue skin now showed intricate patterns that Hayes had learned indicated pleasure and approval. The Council convenes tomorrow to formally recognize humanity's advancement to full status. You will be granted unrestricted access to all yellow zones and offered full partnership in all Council affairs. But tonight, Captain, the entire station celebrates your achievement. Your species has proven something we did not think was possible. Hayes asked curiously. What exactly is that, Counselor? Zax's mandibles clicked, and what Hayes had finally learned was genuine amusement. That courage without arrogance, innovation without recklessness, and wisdom without hesitation can come from a species we barely know. We thought we fully understood humanity based on our studies. We were completely wrong. And I find that I am genuinely glad to be wrong, as the massive celebration erupted all around them with music and joy from 100 different cultures. Dr. Martin leaned close to Hayes and spoke quietly. Sir, we just changed galactic politics forever. Every single species is going to be watching us closely now. Hayes smiled while watching the incredibly diverse crowd of aliens toasting humanity's unexpected success. Then I guess we'd better keep surprising them in good ways. 3 weeks passed quickly after the spectacular Valorian rescue, and humanity's status in the galaxy had transformed dramatically. The Liberty had been joined by 5 more ships from Earth, and Captain Hayes found himself serving not just as a ship's captain, but as humanity's unofficial ambassador to the entire Galactic Council. The formal recognition ceremony had been impressive and moving. Humanity was granted full access to yellow zones, extensive trading rights, and a meaningful voice in minor council deliberations. But Hayes knew there was still another level above them. The species allowed into red zones, who actually sat on the council itself, who shaped galactic policy for everyone. That required passing the mysterious third trial, and the council seemed to be in absolutely no hurry to offer it. "They are afraid of us now," Commander Sullivan observed during a regular briefing aboard the Liberty. "We have embarrassed them twice in front of the entire galaxy. They are not sure what to do with us anymore." Lieutenant Brooks pulled up recent diplomatic communications she had quietly intercepted. "It is not just fear of embarrassment. There is genuine debate happening in the council chambers. Some members think we have proven ourselves more than enough already. Others worry we are too unpredictable and dangerous." Dr. Martin highlighted several concerning reports on her display. "There is another significant factor. Since our dramatic success with the Void Wraiths and the Valorian rescue, 15 other species have formally petitioned to attempt trials they had previously failed or avoided completely. We have inspired them, but we have also created enormous political pressure. The Council's authority is largely based on maintaining order and standards. If everyone suddenly starts succeeding, what does that mean for their power?" Hayes stood and walked slowly to the viewport, staring out at the enormous council station. "It means their standards were not as meaningful as they believed. It means courage and innovation matter more than blindly following ancient protocols. And that threatens everything they have carefully built over millennia." Sullivan asked the obvious question. "So what do we do now?" Before Hayes could formulate an answer, their communication system chimed urgently. It was Counselor Lyra herself. "Captain Hayes, the Council requests your immediate presence." "Come alone, please." The unusual summons was concerning enough that Hayes felt a tight knot of worry as he made his way through the station to the council chambers. He was shown not to the grand main amphitheater, but to a much smaller private room where all 12 counselors waited together. "Thank you for coming so quickly, Captain." High Counselor Zax began without preamble. "We need to discuss the third trial immediately." Hayes remained standing. "I am listening carefully, COUNCILL. OR.COUNCILLOR. Vex leaned forward with obvious concern. "The situation has become extremely complicated. Your remarkable successes have been wonderful, but they have created ripples throughout the entire galaxy. Species are questioning loudly why they remain restricted when a newcomer like humanity advances so incredibly quickly. We are facing serious criticism that our standards are arbitrary and unfair." Hayes asked carefully. "Are they arbitrary?" A heavy, uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Finally, Lyra spoke with her musical voice. "Perhaps some of them have become arbitrary over time. The Council has existed for so long that we have become overly focused on maintaining stability rather than actively encouraging growth. Your species has reminded us rather forcefully that new perspectives have real value. But that creates a serious problem for us." Zax continued the explanation. "The third trial has always been the most difficult because it requires something many species fundamentally lack: the ability to truly change. The trial is this: find a workable solution to a problem Council has been completely unable to solve for over a century. A holographic display suddenly activated, showing a star system with 3 inhabited planets orbiting a yellow sun. This is the Talon system," Vex explained while manipulating the display. 3 distinct species live here: the Talox on the innermost planet, the Viridians on the middle planet, and the Kresh on the outermost planet. 200 years ago, they were actually a single unified species. Then they genetically engineered themselves specifically to survive on their individual planets. The modifications were far too extreme. They can no longer interbreed. They have become completely biologically distinct from each other. Hayes guessed the obvious outcome. "And now they are at war with each other," Lyra confirmed sadly. "Constantly and brutally. They fight over resources, territory, ideology, and ancient grudges that should have been forgotten. Each group claims the entire system belongs to them as the only true inheritors of their original species. The Council has tried everything: mediation, economic sanctions, even direct military intervention. Nothing works. They absolutely refuse peace. Hayes understood the challenge. What does this have to do with the trial? Zax's massive eyes fixed intently on Hayes. The trial is to bring lasting peace to the Talon system, not a temporary ceasefire that will collapse. Real, permanent peace. Do this successfully, and humanity will be granted full council status, including a permanent seat at this table and unrestricted access to all red zones. Hayes studied the display carefully. How many species have attempted this particular trial? Vex replied very quietly. 7 species over the centuries. All 7 failed completely. One species spent 50 full years working on the problem. Before finally admitting defeat, Hayes asked the critical question. And if we fail? Lyra assured him gently. Nothing punitive will happen. You would retain your current status, but the opportunity to advance further would be closed, perhaps permanently. The Council cannot be seen offering endless attempts at advancement. Hayes took a long, slow breath. I will need to consult with my team and with Earth's command. Can I have 48 hours? Zax agreed immediately. Of course, Captain. But please understand something important. We are not ordering you to do this. We are offering you the chance to try. There is absolutely no shame in declining such a difficult challenge. As Hayes left the private chamber, he realized this was fundamentally different from the previous trials. The Void Wraiths had tested raw courage. The Valorian rescue had tested ingenuity and tactical wisdom. This third trial tested something far more complex and difficult. The ability to understand beings so fundamentally different from yourself that they could not even see a path to peace themselves. The next 48 hours were incredibly intense. Hayes assembled not just his crew, but experts from Earth itself. Philosophers, psychologists, anthropologists, historians, and diplomats all participated in round-the-clock video conferences. Dr. Martin led the research effort, compiling absolutely everything available on the Talon system's ongoing conflict. The more I read, she said tiredly after 20 straight hours of work, the more completely hopeless it seems. These 3 species have legitimate grievances against each other. Terrible atrocities have been committed on all sides. Their entire economies are now built around supporting the war effort. They have been fighting for so long that peace seems like betrayal of their ancestors. Sullivan noted darkly. It sounds very familiar. Humans have had plenty of those exact conflicts throughout our history. Hayes agreed slowly. Yes, which means we might understand something the Council does not. Brooks looked up from her detailed analysis with sudden understanding in her eyes. Sir, I think I see exactly why the Council failed so completely. Every single attempt they made was about imposing solutions from outside. They tried to force peace through diplomacy, economics, or military power. But you cannot force people to want peace when they do not. Sullivan asked the practical question. So what is the alternative? Hayes pulled up the historical data and studied it carefully. Look at the pattern here. Every generation of war, the 3 species become more entrenched, more convinced they are fundamentally different from each other. But genetically, they were one single species only 200 years ago. That is only about 6 to 8 generations depending on their lifespan. Martin saw immediately where his thinking was going. Their genetic drift is not that extreme yet. They have artificially accelerated their differences through deliberate engineering, but the base genome underneath it all is still essentially the same. Hayes finished the thought. Could potentially be reversed. Or at least, they could be made compatible for interbreeding again with the right modifications. Brooks objected immediately. That is a truly massive undertaking, Captain. We are talking about genetic engineering on a planetary scale, affecting billions of individuals. Hayes shook his head. No. We are talking about offering them a real choice. Show them it is actually possible to become one unified species again, and let them decide freely if that is what they truly want for their future. Over the next week, Hayes presented his radical proposal to the full council. It was met with immediate skepticism and doubt. You want to offer them genetic reintegration? Vex sounded completely incredulous. Captain, they deliberately chose to separate themselves. Why would they possibly want to reunite now? Hayes explained patiently. Because the separation was supposed to let them thrive on different planets. Instead, it started a war that is slowly destroying all three worlds. If we can show them a realistic path back to unity, maybe they will take it. Or maybe they will not. But at least it is a choice they have never been offered before. Zax objected strongly. The genetic engineering alone would take many years to develop and implement safely. Hayes remained firm. Then we better start now, instead of wasting more time. The council debated intensely for 2 full days, before finally approving the attempt with serious reservations. Hayes and a team of specialists, including geneticists from Earth and several council species, traveled directly to the Talon system. Their arrival was met with immediate suspicion and hostility from all 3 planets. When Hayes broadcast his proposal across all communication channels, the response was swift and angry. "You want us to become those monsters?" Italic's general demanded furiously, clearly referring to the Viridians with disgust. "You want us to abandon our hard-won adaptation and die on an alien world?" A Viridian scientist challenged, "This is obviously a trick to make us weak and vulnerable." A Kresh military leader accused, but Hayes persisted calmly despite the hostility. He did not argue or try to convince them with logic. Instead, he shared something completely unexpected. Human history, 300 years ago, on Earth. He told representatives from all 3 species via open broadcast. Humans were deeply divided by skin color, religion, nationality, and language. We fought terrible wars over these differences. Millions upon millions died, and every side was absolutely convinced they were fundamentally different from the others. That unity was completely impossible. He showed them disturbing images from human history. Segregation, genocide, world wars, the countless horrors humanity had inflicted upon itself over meaningless differences. "We are not better than you," Hayes continued honestly. "We did terrible things to each other for generations. But eventually we realized something crucial. The differences we were fighting over were real, but they were also trivial compared to what united us. We were all human. We all wanted to live, to prosper, to see our children grow safely." A Viridian diplomat responded. "Your species found unity. Ours has found only difference and hatred," Hayes replied gently. "Because you engineered yourselves specifically to be different 200 years ago. You made a choice to adapt to your planets. I am simply offering you a different choice now." To adapt back to each other, the debate raged furiously across all 3 planets for weeks. Hayes and his team worked closely with volunteer scientists from each species, proving conclusively that genetic reintegration was theoretically possible. They showed detailed models of how a unified species could thrive on all 3 planets with proper technology and rotation systems. Slowly. Surprisingly, something began to change in small ways. It started with scientists from the 3 species actually talking to each other directly. Really talking for the first time in generations. They discovered they had more in common than they thought. Their research interests aligned. Their dreams for their people were remarkably similar than families living on the borders between territories. People who had lost loved ones to the endless war began reaching out carefully to each other. Shared grief became an unexpected bridge. 6 months into the project, the first referendum was held simultaneously on all 3 planets. Do you support exploring genetic reintegration and potential reunification? The vote was extremely close on all 3 worlds. But on all 3 worlds, yes won. Even if only by slim margins, it would take years to actually implement. The genetic work alone would require an entire generation. But peace came to the Talon system not because someone forced it, but because Hayes had given them a reason to hope for something better than endless war. When Hayes returned to the council station, he found the entire galaxy watching closely. The impossible had happened. The unsolvable problem had been solved, or at least, a clear path to solution had been opened. High Counselor Zax met him personally at the dock, and this time the massive alien actually bowed respectfully. Captain Hayes, you have done what the Council could not accomplish in a century. You showed wisdom beyond your years as a species. The third trial is passed. Hayes replied carefully. Thank you, Counselor, but I need to be clear about something important. We did not solve the talent conflict. They solved it themselves. We just gave them a tool and a reason to hope. That is all any outsider can ever really do. Lyra's crystalline form shimmered with pure pleasure. That is precisely why you passed, Captain. You understood that some problems cannot be solved by others, only by those who actually live them. Now, please come. The Council convenes to formally grant humanity full status. You will take your seat among us. The ceremony granting humanity full Council status was the most elaborate event the galaxy had seen in centuries. Representatives from over 300 species filled the grand amphitheater, and broadcasts reached billions across dozens of sectors. Captain Daniel Hayes stood before the Council, no longer as a supplicant, but as an equal. The Eye of the moment pressed on him, not oppressively, but with the gravity of responsibility. By unanimous decision of this Council, Zax announced formally, humanity is granted full membership and all associated rights and responsibilities. You will have a voice in galactic policy, access to all regions of space, and the authority to represent not just your species but the principles you have demonstrated. Captain Hayes, you are hereby appointed as humanity's first Council representative. The chamber erupted in applause. Clicks, whistles, and sounds Hayes could not identify from dozens of alien physiologies. Vex raised a hand for silence. This honor comes with serious challenges, Captain. Council members are expected to mediate disputes, contribute resources to common projects, and occasionally make decisions that place galactic needs above species' self-interest. Are you and humanity prepared for this? Hayes met his gaze steadily. We are prepared to try, Counselor. We will not claim to be perfect. Humanity makes mistakes. We have conflicts of our own to resolve, and we are still learning about the galaxy. But we are committed to doing our best. That evening, aboard the Liberty, Hayes gathered his core team for a private celebration. Dr. Martin, Commander Sullivan, and Lieutenant Brooks had been with him since the very beginning, to the captain who changed the galaxy. Sullivan toasted. Hayes corrected him. To the team that made it possible. None of this happens without all of you. Martin asked the question on everyone's mind. So what happens now? Hayes looked at his friends. The real work begins. Passing trials was one thing. Actually serving on the Council and making a difference? That is going to be something else entirely. Over the following months, Hayes discovered the reality of galactic politics. The Council had become bogged down in tradition and procedure, issues that could be resolved. Simply were subjected to endless debate because that was how things had always been done. He also discovered the red zones, finally 7 of the 15. Red zones are not dangerous at all, he told his team privately. They are quarantined because they contain technology the Council does not want species to have. Martin frowned. What kind of technology? Hayes pulled up classified files. Wormhole generators that would make faster-than-light travel obsolete. Artificial intelligence beyond anything we have imagined. Energy sources that would eliminate resource scarcity completely. The Council has been sitting on revolutionary technology for centuries, Sullivan said flatly. Control. If you control access to critical technology, you control the galaxy. Hayes nodded slowly. It is more nuanced than simple control. Some of this technology is genuinely dangerous in the wrong hands. But the Council's default position is restriction rather than education. They assume species cannot be trusted, rather than helping them become trustworthy. During the next Council session, Hayes raised the issue carefully. Counselors, I have been reviewing the red zone classifications. Some seem overly restrictive. Have we considered gradually releasing certain technologies with appropriate safeguards? The reaction was immediate and hostile from the older members, but Hayes persisted. Over the next 6 months, he worked with both progressive and conservative Council members to develop new protocols. Species could petition for access to restricted technologies, but they had to demonstrate not just capability, but responsibility. It was not perfect. And it satisfied no one completely, but it was progress. Movement where there had been stagnation. A year after humanity achieved council status, Hayes stood again in the amphitheater. Addressing the assembled galaxy, when humanity first came to the council, we were treated with skepticism. We were young, inexperienced, and we thought differently. But we passed the trials not by being perfect, but by being willing to try new approaches, by acknowledging fear but not being controlled by it, by finding clever solutions rather than obvious ones, by offering hope to those who had lost it. Today I stand before you as a council member speaking to all of us. We face challenges no single species can solve alone. The galaxy needs the wisdom of ancient species and the innovation of young ones. It needs warriors and peacemakers, scientists and philosophers, traders and explorers. Humanity's gift to the council is not that we have all the answers. It is that we are still willing to ask questions, and we hope that spirit will be our contribution to the galaxy's future. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of species rose in applause. Later, as Hayes watched the Liberty depart with a new captain, he felt both melancholy and anticipation. Lyra appeared beside him. Reflective, Counselor Hayes? Just thinking about how far we have come? A year ago, the council thought we feared battle. Now we are part of the council itself. Lyra replied gently. You proved us wrong about many things, but not about battle. You do fear it in the healthy way that prevents unnecessary conflict. What we misunderstood was that fearing something and facing it anyway, that is true courage. Hayes smiled. And you taught us that wisdom sometimes means questioning what we have always believed, as they walked through the station. Hayes passed dozens of species going about their lives in a galaxy that was slowly, carefully changing. The galaxy had thought humanity feared battle. Instead, humanity had shown them that the greatest battles are not fought with weapons, but with ideas, compassion, the courage to admit when you are wrong. It was legendary, not because humanity was perfect, but because they dared to be genuinely, fallibly, inspiringly human, and for the galaxy that made all the difference.